Let's leave aside the usual topics and talk about the future. When was the last time that we thought about it seriously? The last time it was probably 30 years ago, when a new independent state emerged on the world map and Ukraine laid down the image of a new country in its declaration of sovereignty and the first constitution. Many of you remember this moment. It was an ideal dream that had never been achieved. Any of us hardly imagined the portrait of today's Ukraine to be right as we see it now. And what should our country be like in 30 years if we take today at the starting point? It is impossible to answer this question without understanding what the world around us will be like in 30, 50 years. What will be its challenges and threats? This issues has never been the subject of a broad professional discussion in our country. We discuss only the today's problems. If we public opinion polls can be relied upon, we the Ukrainians do not have an understanding of the future at all. Most believe corruption and despoilment to be our primary challenges. The war takes the second place, and then it is the sale of the land and mass immigration of Ukrainians away from their country. Many just do not have time to realize that it is only a projection of primitive stereotypes imposed on us by politicals and their propaganda. We waste our lives on wrong values and priorities. The last 2 years alone have shown how fragile and unstable the world is that we are all used to, and how inviolable our smallest rights and freedoms are. You may see that there is nothing special about being able to go out of your home and go whatever you want, no matter where, to the store, park, or on vacations. What is so special about regular family dinner or holiday when you can hug your parents? Could it be that going to the cinema or a concert is a value? Only after having temporarily lost all of this, we all realized that nothing could replace the warmth of our mother hands and our father's advice. We realized that no social media or messenger can ever be compared to live communications with our friends and relatives. And even more, nothing, even the most desirable things, can be more important than the feelings and emotions that we people need so much. But then the new world order has come. At first, it only sounded in the speeches delivered at World Economic Forums and in utopian articles by their founders. But later, in gradually rise it had and moved to the tribunes of the head of the countries and officers of international organizations. World capital became feeling close within its own world, and it began a war against the wreckage of the system of civil checks and balances that bothered it so much in gaining the absolute power and longed for domination. Who could ever imagine that the seemingly utopian trainings at the business forum of Bill and Melinda Gates under the obscure title of Event 201 would soon become our reality? In 2019, they jokingly simulated that a bat would transmit a dangerous virus to humans, which would infect 80-90% of the world population. And now their game has come to reality. A small, invisible virus has turned everything upside down, changed the world and rules, questioned the usefulness of all associations, and restored the old borders. When the epidemic swept Europe, borders emerged not only between nations but even between cities. Suddenly, it turned out that there was no unity and every man is for himself in trouble. In this situation, all economic unions, military alliances, and associations just lost their importance, having demonstrated their helplessness and illusory nature. Against this background, what is now the price of joining the EU or NATO, for the sake of which, according to our old politicians and the current priesthood elite, we should live in poverty, neglecting the interests of our country and future generations? Actually, this is the same prospect of 30 years, because of which there will be no European Union. Today it is failing apart at the seams because of the problems of injustice and inequality. The rush of refugees whom Poland, Hungary, and other countries no longer want to accept. Extremely right sentiment is growing in European countries, and Britain's exit from EU and Poland's reluctance to recognize the priority of the laws of the United Europe over their own laws are some more proofs of this argument. The endless flow of refugees and migrant workers changed the face and values of Europe out for all recognition, and it is a problem of the present day rather than a problem of tomorrow. The difference between Europe today and 30 years ago is enormous, but politicians continue to portray the EU as a fabulous socialist paradise, and to make NATO a legend of security through the necessity and importance of these alliances exhausted itself far back in 1991. Created 72 years ago to protect Europe from the Soviet influence, it has lost its relevance upon the collapse of the Soviet Union. Moreover, the Europeans are not going to sacrifice their lives for the sake of any dubious benefits or prospects, and we have seen this many times. Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty on Collective Defense has never been applied in its entire history. Instead, the alliance fought 7 times in wars in Europe and abroad defending the US interests. Meanwhile, new military units have already emerged. The US, the UK, and Australia created the new military alliance AUKUS under the pretext of protecting from China. Canada, Japan, and possibly India are most likely to join them soon. Europe has long been working to create its own European military alliance, call it PESCO. The world is changing rapidly, but the politicians who have fallen behind the times and are living in the past are imposing wrong priorities on us. It also makes no sense to say that our future is to merge with Russia or, on the contrary, to fight with it from Crimea. There are already water problems on a peninsula today. Scientists predict that it will become a zone of climate catastrophe in 30 years, and it will most likely be uninhabitable in 50 years. The old unions and alliances will not protect against the global collapse of the human civilization. The Ukraine of the future will be southern border of the populated world, a border through which billions of hungry refugees from uninhabitable Africa, Asia, and the Middle East will flee to the north. And then Ukraine will really have to defend the whole of Europe against the other cultural, foreigner-speaking invasions from the south, which threatens to trample our world like Rome was once destroyed. Ukraine is mostly like to become one of the principal producers of food to the population of the planet affected by hunger, the connecting link between the west and the east of the continent, where water and habitable land will remain. We are on the brink of a war for habitable territories, and that is why they demand us to sell our land to them. All this is extremely likely. We must be prepared for that. In the future, there will be intercontinental wars for the resources necessary for human survival, and Europe has already been drawn into this confrontation. Of course, we can still follow the paths proposed by Poroshenko and Zelensky, remaining an apple of discord for Europe and Russia and to hindering their union. Or, on the contrary, we can become a platform for a new continental union, its geographical and political center, and then the question of belonging of Crimea, Donbass, Lisbon, Brussels, or Vladivostok will become pointless and useless and unnecessary. Our fate today depends on whether we understand our place and role in the new global reality, whether we stop being an instrument in the hands of others, playing the role of a victim, and find the courage to take responsibility for our future and future of our children, fulfilling our mission, our historical mission, becoming the center of unification of the continental Europe. I am sure that we will take our real place in the real world rather than in the fictional myth of the past. So let's put our present in order and prepare for the future. Great threat, global leadership. There have been increasing debates about the World War III recently. What will it be like? Many see it as a nuclear confrontation between the superpowers, nuclear weapons, radioactive ash of the destroyed cities. But all this will most likely not happen as much as such a scenario means perishing of all the life on Earth and the end of humanity. None of the nuclear powers will consciously do that. In fact, World War III will be a struggle for survival and above all the habitable land, energy, and most importantly, for water and food. This war has already begun. You've probably heard about the melting of the Arctic, global warming, and the deaths of the world's oceans, or about a little girl, Greta, whom adult responsibility man listened with a serious look at the world farms, about people who left their ruins of former states and invaded European countries, about the fall of their foundations under the pressure of foreigners who set their own rules and traditions strange to Europeans. Even if you haven't heard about the above, you have already felt these changes. Talk about them with your friends in companies and share them in social media. Wild heat, dust storms, and then sudden downpours flooding entire cities and territories. Forest fires around the entire planet. Meadows and peatlands burning every spring. Dried wells, shallow rivers and lakes. Desert that has returned to the south of Ukraine. Millions of jellyfish and tons of fish suffocated in the overheated sea. Does it sound familiar? Familiar? The world lost its balance and came close to a catastrophe within the life of only one generation, our generation. The world's population has grown to 7.8 billion over the past 30 years. This is more than the number of people who were born and died on the planet from the 18th to the 20th century. There will be almost 10 billion people in 30 years, and in 50 years, there will be more than 11 billion of us. The question has arisen for the first time in the history of our world. Are there enough resources on the planet to feed all those people? After all, the resources are not enough, even today. According to the United Nations, the Food and Agriculture Organizations, FAO, UNICEF, and the World Health Organization, about 2 billion people on the planet do not have the opportunity to eat properly, to regularly receive safe and nutritious food. About 1 billion people on the planet will starve by 2030. Wildlife will be ruined and destroyed even more and faster every day. The destructive process and accelerating, and we have even less time left. The sea level is rising because of the melting of glaciers, gradually flooding the coastal areas, which are the most densely populated areas. Hurricanes and tornadoes sweep away everything in their way. The islands of the 3 oceans, most of the coast of the United States, Britain, the Netherlands, the Scandinavian countries, Italy, Spain, Germany, and Southeast Asia can go underwater by the end of the century. For Eurasia, where our country is located, this means a flood of migrants who will have to seek a new life on our continent. Ukraine, like Russia and part of Europe, is a place where not only Europeans, but also about 2 billion people of a completely different culture who are not going to learn our languages or wear an embroidered shirt will go to seek salvation. A new great migration of the people is obviously inevitable, and it's not approaching. It has already begun. Europe is an example of this fact. You may have seen the mixture of races and peoples on the streets of Paris, Amsterdam, or Brussels. An increase in the average temperature of the planet by 2 degrees will mean that almost all of Australia, Latin America, Africa, and Middle East and South Asia, including India and South China, will become deserts. It will hardly be possible to engage in agriculture or just live there. And in Kiev, the climate will be like the climate in the south of Australia now. A warming by 4 degrees, which can happen by the end of the century, will mean that most of the entire Earth will become uninhabitable. Siberia, the Urals, the popular region, the Arctic will become a new space where the main reserve of water, forests, and fertile land of the continent will be concentrated. Therefore, the confrontation between Europeans and Russia has no prospects. The people of Eurasia will have to unite to survive. The melting of glaciers has already opened access for industrial development of minerals in the Arctic Ocean shelf, for which Russia and the US and Canada are competing. All through Eurasia today is rich in oil and gas reserves, without which humanity will not be able to do for a long time. We all need to prepare for a new era, a completely new type of energy, and the economy as such is approaching. In view of all this, we need to seek the rational use of our strategical reserves of uranium, cobalt, manganese, and lithium, which are the gold of the 21st century, without which a new type of electricity use is impossible. The price of lithium has tripled over the last 5 years, and the demand is expected to increase almost by 40 times in the next 20 years, which will inevitably result in the further price increase. Ukraine has more than 10% of the world's deposits of lithium, which more than 80 billion in current prices, and according to experts, $1 to $2 trillion in the next 20 years. What we now see as confrontation between states, in which Ukraine is trying to join one of the parties, will soon become a competition of countries, and we are unlikely to move from our continent. We will have to arrange our own fate without instructions from the US and UK embassies. We are the geographical center of a huge entity which is likely to become the only space for a corporation, and we should become its business and political center. There is a huge market here in which Ukraine, Europe, China, and Russia will have to look for new formats of cooperation, new formats of joint survival, new leaders. Of course, this problem is obvious, and the UN is trying to give its answers. 17 goals for sustainable development by 2030, adopted at the United Nations Summit, officially entered into force in 2016. In general, they are right to eradicate eradicate poverty in all its forms, to fight inequality, to tackle climate change. However, all of our previous expectations shows that the UN is always on the side of the rich. The UN has shown a very low efficiency in addressing problems ranging from famine in Africa to wars and hostilities. After all, we have approached the collapse of the human civilization in the eyes of the United Nations and under its responsive leadership, and it has done nothing really significant and stopped the sixth extinction in the history of the planet. Let's recall the already mentioned coronavirus pandemic. The duty to fight the virus and ensuring security has been shifted on the states. Who received the best vaccine first? Those were rich countries. And when the population of the Earth is rapidly concentrated on one continent, there will be no salvation for the chosen. We need to act together to develop new rules that need to be agreed upon already now. We no longer trust the old international institutions and intergovernmental organizations that are outliving their usefulness. Are you sure that they have not become instruments in the hands of those who, under noble pretexts, are actually struggling with the population growth on the planet? After all, it is the product of human life and livestock that are the main sources of greenhouse gases, and hence the cause of the warming in the world that they're considered to be their property. This is the real cause of the systemic genocide against humanity. GMOs, LGBT propaganda, secret biolaboratories scattered around the world, forced vaccination methods are causing more and more suspicious and mass protests. Many have long doubted the natural origins of new deadly viruses that brought the world to its knees, while most of the world's population fears vaccines more than the viruses. We are being deprived of our basic freedoms, made to stay home, and our rights are being restricted under the pretext of public safety. They are destroying the foundations of democracy in order to establish total control and rule us. They are methodically destroyed us by squaring off us against each other. Our continents need new formats of cooperation and new intergovernmental institutions, under the auspices of which solutions will be developed to protect our common interests. We need to join our efforts to stop and redirect climate refugees claiming our land. We need wise decisions to prevent wars for resources and severe cultural conflicts. To unite East and West, we need to create a new system of division of labor and new alliances of states, and we need leaders capable of addressing this complex tasks and dialogue, including continental dialogue. Neither Europe nor Russia, much less Ukraine, will be able to copy with these challenges alone. Only together, uniting all the continental potential, we will be able to survive, protect ourselves, and give life to future generations. I know that the issues we are discussing now may seem unthinkable and fantastic for many of you, but if anyone said about the unification of the European states fighting in World War I into a single European Union, he would be considered insane. Half a century later, however, this unification took place, but this delay cost Europe tens of millions of lives and fates crippled by the two world wars. Sooner or later, circumstances will force us to unite to survive and defend ourselves, and Ukraine should be an initiator of these processes rather than the obstacle, as our great American and British friends say. It is in our interests and in interests of whole continent. Ukraine must be a platform for negotiations and a generator of new advanced ideas, the leader of the continent, the center of Eurasia in every sense of this world. This is our response to new global challenges. This is our new unifying national idea. Are we ready? Let's assess our current readiness for the obvious future. Can we be prepared if our lives are still guided by wrong priorities, petty senses that do not go beyond the well-known army, language, faith, etc.? The answer lies on the surface. We have lost our sovereignty and independence, and our government is focused on the interests of other states when making decisions. Our foreign and domestic policies are governed by foreigners who even do not conceal it. Ukrainians' total public debt exceed 2.4 trillion hryvnias. We pay every second hryvnia to repay debts. All of us, and even the unborn generation, are already debtors. Migration sentiment of Ukrainians has reached its peak in the last 6 years, and more than 40% of the citizens of Ukraine want to live the country forever. The amount of foreign trade has fallen by almost 40 billion since 2013, while abandoning conventional markets and the dream of the UA market have only caused losses and destroyed entire industries. During 30 years of reforms, our economy has not tripled like the economy of our neighbors, but has decreased by 1.5 times. Enterprises, if the aviation and space industries, those that used to build ships, engines, complex machines and devices, has mostly stopped. We have not been able to defend ourselves and do not control part of our territory. Millions of people went to Poland, Russia and other countries. The sale of land and natural resources was launched on the eve of the struggle for them. Healthcare, education, science and the entire social services has been virtually destroyed. There are almost no sources of investment left, and the authorities are thinking of new ways to get the last out of people's pockets. It is very difficult or almost impossible to do businesses in Ukraine legally. We have also contributed to global climate change. Mankind cuts down more than 15 billion trees every year, and the deforested Carpathians have already become a national tragedy. According to the State Statistics Service, we have cut down more than 4 million hectares of forest in just 10 years since 2008, which is 47 area of Kyiv. A little more than 500,000 hectares have been restored. Amber mining has turned vast fertile areas into a lunar landscape, and at the recent 23rd EU-Ukraine summit in Kyiv, Europe announced that we would pay for the expansion of the trade cooperation and industrial visa waiver by mass exporting raw wood to buy it later, but in the form of expensive furniture. Half of the world's fertile land is used in agriculture, and Ukraine cultivates more than 57% of entire territory, while another 14% is used as a pasture. Thoughtless and barbaric depletion of fields, violation of crop rotation, plowed floodplains, irrigation from wells have resulted in the rapid desertification of the south of the country. The world's most fertile soils are jeopardized by irresponsible agriculture. The annual harvest highly depends on the weather, which has become unpredictable, and we have not seen the billion trees promised by another advocate of wrong priorities in the presidential office, as well as the fight against poverty and nepotism. Instead, we have received lawlessness, censorship, political repression, destruction of the social service area, and mass immigration. It looks like Ukrainians are being forced out of their country to make room for future immigrants from the civilized world. Africa and the Middle East, Poland and the Baltic countries are already fencing of them. We can hardly survive this century with such initial data. The political nation will die before it's born, and disputes over what ideas people fought for 100 years ago will not help our children in the near future. To enter it strong, I offer you the formula of the country: a successful country, safe, prepared for change, ready for leadership. Formula of the country. I do not want to mislead anyone. We have a very ambitious and extremely difficult goal, not only in terms of its implementation, but also in terms of its initial understanding and acceptance. The goal is to prepare for the future in which we must unite the continent to survive or perish forever. We need to find ways to become the leader of Eurasia and the center of important decisions. After all, being a leader means to be respected, to know your businesses better than anyone else, and to be responsible for your own actions. Then we can lead others. The spirit of leadership doesn't depend on the size of the territory. To be heard and ensure that others are ready to sit at the same negotiation table with us, we must first become a country that knows its worth, a country that has not only resources but also an idea, a country that is interesting for cooperation. We should be the best in everything, be proud not of the past but of the present, show the way to the future. These are dignified goals worth uniting, worth living and working. And now we need to preserve our country, make it comfortable for the life of at the time of our generation, make the citizens of Ukraine not only richer but also smarter, forget the world crisis once and for all, rise the national economy and stop being one of the poorest countries in Europe, come on the path of development and prosperity. These are tactical goals around which all citizens of Ukraine should unite, regardless of the ideology they like, which church they go to, and what language they speak in everyday life. The formula of the country is based on peace, true independence, change of entire government system, broad cultural autonomy of the regions, new industrialization, efficient and productive agriculture, better innovative education, advanced science, effective medicine, strong social security, justice, law and order. And of course, it is the complete absence of corruption. Those who steal from their people must be condemned to shame, contempt and imprisonment. Ukraine's mission as a new center of united Continental Eurasia cannot be implemented without the implementation of this formula. In what way can we be interesting, and what will be our contribution to the implementation of the continental project? Our unique geographical location in terms of the project, labor resources, mineral reserves, drinking water, fertile lands make us essential, especially in the face of the catastrophic climate change in the coming decades. They give us a significant advantage that our parents do not have, and their superiority over us today can be leveled by the world's oceans, which will soon change the world's landscape, and they know it. Therefore, the first and foremost thing we need to do is to regain legal personality and independence, get rid of the external control of our Western allies and the war that is unfavorable for us, deal with our own economy, standard of living, bring our labor refugees back to the country, and not allow potential enemies to sell our land, which is the most prestigious resource of the future, and this must be changed right now. Independence and sovereignty. Our country is our responsibility. We must honestly admit to ourselves that we do not govern our own country. The so-called reforms and dictated by the IMF and the foreign embassies, initially they were implemented by foreign tourists, Georgians, Balts, Poles, citizens of the US and UK. But what good have they done? What happened to our medicine, law enforcement system, education, economy, and banks? Foreigners in the government, as well as the supervisory boards of our strategic enterprises, which have become unprofitable under their management, act for the benefit of their countries. They create the Independent National Bank, Naftogaz, the judiciary, and other independent bodies. But they are independent of us, Ukrainians. They have taken control of our country. We are being robbed and destroyed, squeezed out of our land, and the land will soon no longer be ours, and millions of our citizens are toiling abroad for foreign masters. Is all this actually different from occupation or colonization? We must get free from them and regain our independence. We must prohibit foreigners and foreign agents from holding positions in the government of our country. At the legislative level, clear all supervisory boards and return control over state authorities to Ukrainians. And all recipients of grants from foreign countries and funds should be registered in a special register and subject special control by law enforcement agencies. Financial bondage. Today, every Ukrainian, from kids to adults, owes more than $2,000 which they didn't borrow. Our governments live from a loan to a loan, and each new tranche becomes a national holiday for the rules and national strategy for us. More than half of all the money earned by the country is spent to serve and repay public debt borrowed by politicians. It is over 600 billion hryvnias this year. It is 1.5 times more than our expenditures for defense, medicine, education, and science together. Taking advantage of our tragic situation, financial raiders dictate their rules in everything: whom to fight with, whom to trade with, what tariffs and fees to set for the population, what industry to destroy so that it doesn't compete with the multinational corporations. It's high time to break this vicious circle. Debts should be restructured, and those who have robbed our country and withdrawn money offshore must be brought to liability. Everything stolen from the country and the people must be returned, and this will be more than enough to cover the debts. This is the only help we need from our foreign partners. They know exactly what their loans were spent for and in whose accounts they are accumulated. Geopolitical factor. There is another, possibly the most important condition and guarantee of our independence and sovereignty. It is naturally and non-allegantly status. On 16 July 1990, more than a year before gaining independence, the Verkhovna Rada of the Ukrainian SSR adopted a historic and fateful document, the Declaration of State Sovereignty. It outlines the future image of the young independent state, and these were our commitments, the project of the country we would become, with which the whole world agreed, including to Russia and the US, key geopolitical opponents. Ukraine committed itself to be a non-aligned, natural and non-nuclear state in order not to change the balance of geopolitical forces on the planet and not to become anyone's trump card. But as soon as our rules tried to violate this principle, one of the opponents and the co-guarantor of the Budapest Memorandum began to interfere with our internal efforts. The drift towards Russia has always led to Maidans and unconstitutional change of the leadership. The drift towards NATO led to the annexion of the Crimea. If we continue the fertilized movement, this will only fuel the conflict in Donbass, depriving the country of prospects and may soon lead to catastrophic consequences. We will not get security guarantees and ensure non-interference in our efforts by the United States without enshrining their neutrality and non-aligned status in the Constitution through an all-Ukrainian referendum. There will be no peace in the country without this. We will not be left alone until we give firm guarantees, and only irresponsible politicians, foreign agents in the warm studios of TV channels who send our children to death instead of themselves can effectively fight nuclear alliances. Everyone needs peace, and Ukraine's mission is to ensure it. Governance system. The world has changed a lot in 30 years, and Ukraine has changed too, but unfortunately, not for the better. The current situation is the natural consequences of the often erroneous and imperfect political system. Every time we elect the government, we vote for good, decent people, and after a few years, we feel ashamed of our choice. You know this feeling, and so do I. In the absence of system of checks and balances, real control over the government, and improper distribution of the balance of power, politicians are inevitably tempted, turning from the hope of voters to their tragedy. For some reasons, politicians easily exchange a unique opportunity to leave their mark in history for corrupt money. And the worst thing is that they take away our time, which is the most valuable resource in everyone's life, which even the wisest ruler in the world cannot give us back. 5 years of a life is a huge term, and the next election just increase the number of wasted opportunities. We do not have time anymore. It is vital for our build a system of government that doesn't depend on personalities and wrong choices, but serves the citizens in all conditions with many degrees of protection. Therefore, it is the time for a new social agreement. We need a new constitution of Ukraine that takes into account the mistakes of the past and adopts the most effective world experience. A new social-political agreement, which will protect the citizens of Ukraine, will ensure a fair balance between our representatives in local self-government authorities and central government. We do not need servants, much less masters. We need effective managers, whose surname we do not need to know and of whose existence we will mention once in 5 years. A ceremonial president, a strong prime minister, a minimum of officials and the center, and a maximum of power in local governments. A balance between all verticals of power, the government and the opposition, a viable legal system. This is our formula of the country. The source of power on our formula of the country is really the people, because all key decisions at the national level are made exclusively in regular all-Ukrainian referendums, and at the community level in local referendums. We must make decisions, be responsible for them, and have the right to correct our mistakes. We will no longer have to suffer for years and watch the next former government evade responsibility. We have developed a transparent and democratical mechanism for early termination of powers of officials, senators, and deputies of all levels. And only then that we will have hired and accountable managers instead of the caste of the privileged. The Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine will consist of 2 chambers. The National Assembly will consist of 150 deputies, and the Senate will consist of 2 senators from each region. They will be elected by direct vote for 5 years. The National Assembly will adopt laws, and the Senate will approve them. This means that the regions will have an actual right to veto discriminatory initiatives increasing the defenses. There will be no more anti-people laws in principle. The right of legislative initiative will be additionally raised in groups of 500,000 of citizens of Ukraine who have the right to be elected. The government will always steal if it controls itself. We will enshrine a clear legal status of the parliamentary majority and the parliamentary opposition at the level of the constitution and laws. Control over the government should be exercised by the opposition, that is, an original opponent of the government, endowed with the necessary powers of control. The opposition should be granted the right to appoint the first deputy of the National Assembly, Attorney General, Chairman of the Accounting Chamber, Speaker of the Parliamentary Communities, on freedom of speech and information policy, rules of procedure, human rights, national monitories, preventing and combating corruption, social policy, employment and precisions, culture, and spiritually. Our history shows that no matter what slogans the next president uses to come to power, He soon became the president of only part of the country and thus only intensified the differences. And a few years before the election, in order to run for re-election, the president is trying to unsrum all independent verticals of power, bring under control independent media, and become a father of corruption. In addition, the dualism in the executive branch of power between the president and the prime minister almost always leads to a political crisis, or even worse, for the country, to appointing the president of a knowingly weak and controlled prime minister who serves the will of the president, who turns into a king. Therefore, we promise that the president is left exclusively representative and ritual functions, as in the vast majority of European democracies, and that all executive power is transferred to the cabinet of ministers. The president will sign international treaties, but will not conclude them, as it will be a function of the government, sign laws, but will not have the right of veto, represent the state in the international arena, but will not determine foreign policy, take decisions on citizenship, etc. The president will appoint a third of judges of the Constitutional Court and have the right to dissolve the lower house of Parliament, the National Assembly. The President will not be the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Force. The Commander-in-Chief will be the Minister of Defense in peacetime and the Prime Minister in wartime. The Prime Minister will be the main but a compromise figure in the country. It will work for a benefit of the entire Ukraine rather than for a benefit of individual regions. It will pursue a unifying policy and promote balanced decisions, and the distortions of recent years will forever stay in the past. The new system will protect against them. It is very important to adopt a law on lobbying. It is high time, like in all civilized countries, to establish clear principles and rules of relations between politics and business. This will eradicate political corruption, force businesses to lobby its interest transparently and openly for citizens, and benefit everyone, especially our citizens. The system I propose contains international tools of checks and balances, and therefore safeguards against tyrants and laymen in power from international and discriminatory decisions, and most importantly, it gives voters the opportunity to quickly control and correct their mistakes at any time rather than in 5 years. Decentralization. We must honestly admit to ourselves the obvious thing. Ukraine is not a monotheistic state. We have already paid Donbass and Crimea trying to prove the opposite, and it may cost us even more. It is easy to finally understand, in addition to a handful of stupid activities who identify themselves with the titular nation, our country is home to representatives of dozens of peoples and nationalities, millions of citizens of Ukraine with equal rights and responsibilities. Our country within its modern borders was formed in the territories of the former Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman and Russian empires. Linguistic and religious diversity, cultural heritage, richness of traditions make it unique. We must respect, preserve, and develop this so as not to lose our country. Those who say and do the opposite are working to divide the country, create the ground for civil strife, which will certainly benefit the empires that have transformed and want to regain that they consider to be their historical lands. Some of our politicians may have a plan to integrate Ukraine into the EU in parts, to sell the motherland in pieces. But we cannot accept this. We need a strong, independent, united, and integral Ukraine, our meta-continental union and leadership in it, quite different horizons. And to make our country like this, we must once and for all end attempts to make it a great Donbass or a great Galicia. To do this, we need a real broad decentralization, both financial and cultural. There should be as few officials as possible in the central authorities. All money earned in the regions should remain in the regions, except for contributions to ensure the operations of the central authorities, army, customs, border protection, foreigner policy, central law enforcement agencies, national bank, monopoly on the development of the mineral deposits, emergency response, joint organization of life in the country are the powers of the central authorities. The regions should be transformed, all powers related to the organization and life of the people in the regions. All key regional decisions should be taken in local referendums, from names of cities and development priorities to culture, language policy, and education. The state should be a guarantor of living standards throughout its territory and constantly raise these standards. Expanding the economy's priorities and financial powers of the regions will create the basis for their development and psychological precoordinations for the reunification of the country, laying the foundation of the peaceful coexistence of all regions on the basis of equality. Each region should have a special status providing for the widest possible powers of local self-government, elected executive authorities and judges, municipal policy like in Europe and the US. The regions should have the right to veto amendments to the constitution and all Ukrainians' laws, and the right to an independent tax and financial policy. The basic legal documents for a broad decentralization in our country should be the Constitution of the Ukraine and the European Charter of Local Self-Government. In the future, we're talking about a single person will not be able to govern the vast territory of Eurasia from a single center, especially the territory inhabited by completely different peoples. Peace. Peace is the fourth point of our formula of the country, not because it is not so important, but because peace is simply impossible without independence, a new system of governments, and decentralization, and we need it like air. The undeclared war has been going on for 1.5 times longer than the Great Patriotical War. It is most Ukrainians who are dying on both sides, not taking into account the few foreign mercenaries. None of the presidents have declared war. The same politicians are constantly condemning the aggressor country, at the same time want to supply gas to Europe with it. Neither Turchinov, nor Poroshenko, nor Zelensky, who shouted about the war, dared to officially admit it. Other names were invaded for it in Ukraine, such as ATO or JFO, and they are not going to end at all. Through the war is destroying our homes, our lives and our future. Ukraine is losing the most from the trade sanctions, having already lost several industrials and millions of workers. The constant threats of possible escalation of expansions of the conflict zone frightens foreigners and domestic investors. They simply leave the country, and possible mobilization pushes young people away from the war to Europe and Russia. The whole world insists on resolving the conflict through the implementation of the Minsk agreements, and only the US and UK provide Ukraine with weapons and money for weapons. That is morally and materially contributing the continuance of the war. The war in Ukraine is the very heart of Europe, makes it impossible to unite the countries of Eurasia and reduce both the overall continental potential and the potential of each country in relation to the new military alliance of the US, the UK and Australia. We may seem that our government should act in the national interests and be interested most in achieving peace, but it comes up with the new reasons every time why it is impossible to negotiate. Why so? Because we are not independent. The government is completely controlled by those who are interested in continuing the war, the US and the UK, because equality of rights and equal representation of the region means the return to the election process of 5 million citizens of Ukraine who will vote against war, hatred, censorship, political repression. They will not leave the warlords any chance to stay in power, which means irreversible punishment for betraying the national interests. The massacre on the Maidan, the surrender of Crimea, Odessa on 2nd May, Ilovai's, Debaltseve, and war crimes for corruption, ruined economy, destroyed medicine and education, traffic genocide, for all that the government did under the guise of war. A change of power of puppets will not bring peace back to Ukraine. It is necessary to get rid of external governments and regain independence and sovereignty in order to really start a peacefully settlement rather than its imitation. Guarantees of security and respect for human rights and freedoms, not only in Donbass, but also in every region, are part of our formula of the country, part of a smart system of government in which the cultural conflict will end. Humanitarian dimensions. The main value and priority of Ukraine in our country formula is its citizens. Quality of human life and population growth are a key criteria for the work of state institutions. If the population grows, the country is moving in the right direction. If its citizens leave the country, the government needs to be changed. The state should invest in human capital, in the health and training of citizens, their spiritual and cultural development. State, municipal, medicine, and education will be free and accessible to all. We need to grow a new elite capable of taking decisions for the benefit of our people. We need the right education system and priorities. A child born today will be a little less than 30 in 2050, and they will face completely different tasks than today. In the conditions of a completely new reality, they will have to take care of our old days and the preservation of this world. They should be well prepared for this. What children should be taught now to provide them with a dignified life in the future that we can imagine only in the most general terms? What skills will they need to find a job, understand what is happening, and navigate the many complex stories offered by life? We objectively understand that, given the speed of information flow, the amount of information and the impending catastrophe, we cannot let young people to spend 12 years in school and 5 more in the university to obtain outdated and useless knowledge and skills in the near future. Training and education must take into account the context of the new industrial revolution, climate change, which will bring about a new reality. If we focus on studying the existing and outdated programs, we will not be able to train specialists to address tomorrow's challenges. We must teach a person to perceive information, to distinguish the important from the insignificant, to adapt, and most importantly, to combine disparate fragments of data into a holistic picture of the world. We must learn to think, analyze, and most important, to give all the necessary practical skills in the learning process. There should be no separation of real practice from theory. As Alexander Suvorov said, theory is dead without practice. Only well-educated person with values, understanding of himself and the world around him, responsibly to society, is able to solve almost all problems, including those related to global challenges, overpopulation, crime, resource scarcity, attitudes towards nature and the environment. A person with a flexible mind will be able to come to terms on peace and the rules of coexisting with other people. He will always strive for growth and will always be the most effective living being on the planet. We will create a single educational space between school, university, and practice. We will apply only an individual approach. Education should not be based on subjects, but on modules, developing all the abilities and inclinations of students from early childhood, constantly analyzing, revealing, and directing their development. The experience of distance learning gained during the pandemic should also be generalized, studied, and formalized. It can be promising and effective for primary school students and children with disabilities. We should not spend money on training professionals who will never find a job. Their number and profile must meet the needs of the state and business. We should be based on a development strategy for these years. And of course, such a specialist must know the main language of the world. By the way, everyone in our country studies Russian, Ukrainian, and a foreign language as part of the school curriculum 8 years ago. The diversification policy pursued by the post-Maidan leaders deprived students of the knowledge of the Russian language, but didn't add a nuance. They deprive us of the knowledge we had historically. Also, Russia is one of the 6 official languages of the United Nations, and it's spoken by more than 300 million people on the planet. It is a tool for communications and earnings and additional opportunities for interaction and compromise. While we lack so much, command of languages makes us more competitive. In addition to Ukrainian, an educated citizen of our state should be fluent in 3 main languages of the continent, otherwise they will simply not be prepared for the future. Our science should master other languages and the knowledge created in them, and not to be a raw material appendage. Ukraine should overcome the gap in science, change the attitude to it's a basic part of the development of social and production. If it doesn't happen, the number of our scientists will decrease 5-fold by 2035 compared to 2015. Having lost science, we will lose another part of independence, forever become a consumer of other technological ideas. We just cannot afford it. The scientific and technological progress will be a priority for the country and a budget funding. We have provided for a system of professional taxation for investors who invest in research and development. We will create the ground for the emergence of new names in world science at the level of Igor Sikorsky, Sergei Korolev, Yevhenii Patton, and Boris Patton, Mykola Amosov, one of the best mathematicians of our time, Marina Vyazovska. When we give priority to the national investors, an effective system of government, understanding of our own mission in the big world, it will involve completely different priorities and approaches to governing the country, to ability to earn a decent living for the country and its citizens. Today, by the will of overseas and European partners, Ukraine is assigned a role of a raw material appendage, supplier of workers, deprived of civil rights, seller of raw materials and agricultural products in the global division of labor. Foreigner and domestic reformers turned the industrial state into an agrarian one. We have rolled back 100 years. All through even protected areas and floodplains have been plowed. The land is being ruthlessly exploited, and Ukraine, despite having the most fertile soil on the planet, is no longer able to make ends meet and is increasingly trapped in debt. As the population grows, global demand for food will only increase. And to survive and earn a living, we need to preserve our land as the most valuable resources, to keep it in your possession, to preserve its fertility, and to become as effective in this area as the Netherlands have long been. We have the experience of increasing yields by 4 times using twice less water, fertilizing and emitting less carbon right in front of our eyes. Despite its modest size, the Netherlands is now one of the 10 largest food exports in the world and the 3rd largest in Europe. Where is the agrarian Ukraine in this ranking? But this is only one of the directions in which we should move. Ukraine is and will be a great industrial power. We have everything for this: scientific and technical potential, skilled labor forces, the necessary infrastructure, and our geopolitical location opens up enormous opportunities for trade and transit. A sensible combination of all factors will ensure the well-being of the population during the lifetime of the present generations. This requires a drastic change in approaches to economy, internal and foreign policy, changing their focus to earnings and technological development. Want a great example of how to do this very quickly? Here you are. We have a huge reserve of cobalt and lithium, which fact has already been mentioned today. In 2030, there will be 125 million electric cars on the planet, 40 times more than now, and the main components of their batteries are lithium and cobalt. We sit on bags of money, but for some reasons we're living in debt and trading in corn. Most likely they will try to make us sell it as a raw material again, but we have to build our own factories and produce final products with high added value. We will provide conditions for placing our own production facilities near the raw material base and giving the natural potential given us by God. This will provide millions of jobs and billions of budgets of all levels. We will provide jobs to everyone and even to those who have been forced to leave. Ukraine needs a new economic policy based on the following: new industrialization, efficient agriculture and extensive processing, expansion and development of the transit potential, competitive tax policy and efficient banking system. Recipe for economic prosperity have long been known. To improve the country's investment attractiveness, we need a tax decrease, a policy of cheap money and affordable loans for the real sector of the economy, tax incentives for those who create new jobs, stable and unchanging rules for investors. We will provide a 100% guarantee of deposits in domestic banks and an unconditional tax amnesty for capital. Ownership will become a Ukrainian sacred cow, and most importantly, we will establish a fair legal system, clear to investors. Capital always goes where it can get more profit and is safer. And Ukraine will become a place like this. All this will allow the country to never live in debt again, but to earn on its own. It is high time for Ukraine to stop being a dead end on the economic axis between the largest markets in Europe and Asia. The business initiative to create a single economic space from Lisbon to Vladivostok of Ukraine and the member states of the European Union and the Eurasian Economic Union was designed at the beginning of this century. But this initiative is constantly opposed by our continent opponents, such as US, UK and Australia. They are hindering the Eurasia unification because, of course, it claims the championship, the geopolitical leadership on the planet. That is why the United States, which seeks to remain a global gendarme, will do its utmost to ensure that the war in Ukraine doesn't end. We must understand this and fight with all our might against what harms our future and security. We must help Europe free itself from the almost 80 years old occupation by allies that began after World War II. The common economic space, collective security and stability in Europe is a real project. China's great innovative of One Belt, One Road is part of the integration idea of the great Eurasian partnership. We must become a bridge for this partnership. Block number 5. Manifest. Let's sum up. Everything we have talked about today is quite feasible, subject to the political will and, most importantly, a common vision of the future. We should not think that we will live in a society of the blind and indifferent, or even worse, among those who thoughtlessly obeyed the cries of casual passers-by who came to power. People have been artificially driven into a situation where they have no real choice, and their true voice is deliberately not heard. They turn away and pretend that another political myth is more important than living men, women, or children, that the investors of this myth know something we do not know and have a great purpose that no one understands. In fact, we're being offered fake values and false goals, but real, living people who want change for the better here on this land and are ready to implement it. They understand a lot, know a lot, and can even more. Together with the Our Land Here project, we have already visited many cities in Ukraine, and I can say for sure that Ukrainians, all citizens, regardless of their ethnicity, are tired of lies and uncertainty about the future. They are sick and tired of not being able to influence anything. They are sick and tired of the constant anxiety about what the future holds in store for their children. After all, we all want our children to live better than we do, don't we? And to make it happen, we need to create a better future for them. Give them something they can confidently live their lives, no matter what happens around them. We offer a vision of the right goal and sound values. Many things can be influenced if you know what you are doing and why. If you can count on the help and understanding of your neighbors. Every great work begins with a common vision and a common desire to achieve a goal. And when millions of people want the same thing, and they are going to their dreams every day, step by step, the success is inevitable. The most important thing is to be able to distinguish the important from the insignificant and combine disparate fragments of data into a holistic picture of the world. This is the quality of proper education we have just talked about. Let's start with this, with the distinguishing of the important from the insignificant, with separating endless judgments from understanding real things. We offer the formula of the country combines with the vision of the future for the wide decisions, for the wide discussion. I will come to you myself. We will discuss our common causes in each region of Ukraine. We will try to bring you together in both large and small cities. It is only the understanding of our destiny, the need to live together and govern our own country can lead to real change. What does the future have in store for us? We proceed from the worst-case scenario, in which humanity will reach the example of self-destruction in a mad race for survival, for money, for illusory success, that there will be a great magnition of the peoples, and we will have to defend our own living space, that those who are now called enemies will be our natural allies and partners, that together we must build life in a completely new environment on a planet that will be a little like our usual world today. But it is not the end of the story. There is always a rise after a fall. Even in the worst times, we lived, loved, gave birth to children, found opportunities to be happy and dreamed of better times. And we didn't just dream but created them ourselves, rising our country from the ruins more than once in history. We will still have to recreate our world anew, taking into account the mistakes made, start small from our land and gradually move to great deeds, the whole continent. We should focus on economic growth, address many issues in education, health, social protections and employment, fight climate change, turn our planet into a flowery garden again and protect it from stupidity and greed, to create our own unique political system, which will be neither communism nor Nazism, nor a parody of democracy. The formula of the country is the first essential step to the future. What I have said today about it is not all. Therefore, I invite you to learn more about the mechanism of returning normality to our lives and its continuous improvement. Ukraine thrives when it trades, not fights. Being a bridge between the largest markets of the West and the East in the Great Eurasian Partnership project, rather than the front line, we will very quickly be able to earn such a big money for our country that no one will ever lend us. Having gone through difficult times of war and destruction in our minds, creating a recipe for civil peace and an effective humanitarian strategy, we will be able to teach this to others. By turning our system of education and science upside down, we will create a human potential that will be able in the future to inhabit areas that were previously uninhabitable. We are able to change so that not the American, but the Ukrainian way of life becomes a model for others, so that neighboring nations follows our better practices. The granary of Eurasia, the land of the masters, the source of wise decisions, the treasury of intelligence, and the forge of advanced technologies. That is a country that our children need, as well as we do. Let's start creating it together today.